First create the client file. In client file, first we have declared an integer variable serve underscore socket. It will be used for the socket function. Now the socket function is used to create a socket. The socket function has three parameters. The first one is the domain, which specifies address family used in the communication domain. The second is the type, which specifies the socket type to be created. And the third one is the protocol, which specifies particular protocol. If it is 0, then it takes the default protocol. AF underscore INET is an address family that tells the type of address that your socket can communicate with. Sock underscore stream is the type that provides sequential, reliable, bidirectional connection mode byte streams. Now socket function returns a -1 if socket is not created, and if socket is created successfully, it returns an integer value, which we call as the socket descriptor. Now we have created the socket. If the socket is created successfully, now we have the B0 function. It is used to set all the socket structures with null value. Now we assign the address and port for the socket. This is used for the domain and this is used for the port. Now we use the connect function. Now the connect function is used to connect. It has three parameters. The first is the socket descriptor that we have used here, and the second is the name that points to the sock adder structure, and the third is the size of the name. Now the connect function returns a 0 if the connection is successful, and it returns a -1 if there is a connection failure. Now if we are successfully connected, then we go to the chat function. In chat function we have declared an array. It is used to store the message. Here we have the while loop. We can enter the message till we press enter. We have the write function. In write function there are three parameters. The first is the socket descriptor. The second is the message, and the third is the size of the message. We have the read function. It has the same parameters as that of the write function. They are used to write and read respectively. Now we print the message. Then there is string compare. If it is by, then we print this and then we break, and then the control returns here, and then we close the server socket. Create the server file. In server file again we have declared integer variables. Serve underscore socket, we would be using it for the socket function, and con every we would be using it for the accept function. Now the socket function, it is the same as we had used it in the client file. It has three parameters. The first is the domain, the second is the type, and third is the protocol. Now the socket function returns a -1 if socket is not created, and it returns an integer value, which is the socket descriptor, if socket is created successfully. Now that we have created the socket, we assign the IP and the port. After that we bind the socket. Now the bind function binds unique local name to socket with descriptor socket. Now it has three parameters. The first is the socket descriptor, the second is the address, and third is the size of the address. The bind function returns a 0 if it is binded successfully, and returns a -1 if the binding fails. So if we have binded successfully, then we'll listen. Now, the listen function marks a connection mode socket specified by socket argument as accepting connection. Now, the listen function returns a 0 if it is successful, and it returns a -1 if it fails. Now, if it is successful, then we accept. Now for this, first we have to store the size of client in an integer variable, because we would be reading its address for the accept function. Now the accept function extracts first connection on queue of pending connections. It creates a new socket with same socket type protocol and address family as specified socket. Now it has three parameters. The first is the socket descriptor, the second is the address, and third is the address of the size. So we had stored here, so its address is here. Now the accept function, it returns a negative value if it fails, and it returns a non-negative value, which is the new file descriptor, when it would be stored in this integer variable. So if it is successful, it returns a non-negative integer value that would be the new file descriptor. Now that we have been accepted, we can go to the chat function. In chat function, now we have passed the new file descriptor. In chat function, it is similar to that of used in the client file. The only difference is that here we first read and then we have write, and then again we have the comparison as we had in the client file, and the control returns here, and then we close the serve socket. So here we have created the server file.